Hey, everybody. In this episode of the Men for Life podcast, I'm talking to Steve Karlen, the campaign director for 40 Days for Life. Steve is also the co-author of these two books here, What to Say When and What to Say When To. These books are great for pro-life apologetics. They are written in a very easy to understand, very easy to repeat, very easy to memorize way to have those hard conversations with the pro-choice side. Before we get started, I do want to say, if you appreciate our podcast, if you like what we're doing, if you like the conversations we're having, please support us. You can go to menforlife.org. There is a donate button. Every little bit helps. You can also support the work that we're doing to help pro-life pregnancy centers to reach the young men who come in with the moms in unexpected pregnancies. We know that 70% of women have said that the most influential voice in their decision to choose life or to choose abortion is the father of the child. We are working to reach those men and help them to make life-affirming decisions and to become good men. So help us to build out our fatherhood curriculum for the pro-life pregnancy centers. Help us to continue to put out this podcast. menforlife.org. Find that donate button. Now for Steve Karlen. Hey, Steve, how are you today?
Hey, great. How are you today? Thanks for having me.
I'm good. Thanks for being on. I really appreciate this. I'd like to start, if it's all right with you, by just kind of going through your background, how you got involved in the pro-life movement, what brought you to 40 Days for Life, and then the books that you've authored.
So I would say, probably like many Americans, I've always been pro-life. There's not a point in my life where I've been anything other than pro-life, but for so much of my life, I never did anything about it. And I don't know if that's because I was lazy or maybe I didn't know what I could do to make a difference. But for one reason or another, I just never acted on that conviction that I held in my heart that every life is sacred and precious and needs to be defended. And that really began to change one day back when my wife, Laura, and I were newlyweds. We were living in Chicago at the time. And as I was arriving to work, I got a text message from my wife, who's hated sending text messages because these were the days where, if you wanted to send like the letter S, it was like 7777, just hated it. And sure enough, I checked my phone. There was something wrong. She was calling me to let me know that a close friend of hers, a young woman with whom she spoke pretty much every day, shared with her that she was pregnant, but don't worry about it. She was going to take care of it. She was going to get an abortion. And everybody in her life pretty much was telling her that was the right decision. They said, you've got to look out for yourself. You got to look out for your future. Don't let anybody try to tell you this is a moral decision. And my wife, Laura, at the time was not actually pro-life herself. She would have described herself as pro-choice. And I think it's not so much because she was like actually pro-abortion, but she had never come face to face with the tragic reality of this abortion crisis. But here in her friend Jessica, it really was a trial by fire. She had an instant conversion, and she went from waking up that day considering herself pro-choice to just a few hours later offering Jessica whatever love and help and support and encouragement that she might need to choose life for her baby. And so Jessica did choose life, and we were thrilled. We were delighted by this life saved. And we scheduled a dinner with her one Friday evening in downtown Chicago. And we got to the restaurant. She never showed. Her phone was turned off. 2 days later, she called sobbing, telling my wife that while we were waiting for her at the restaurant, she was having her abortion. The doctors had pressured her right back into an abortion decision. So that was sort of the moment for me where I recognized it wasn't enough for me to just be pro-life. I had to get up off the couch, turn the football game off once in a while, and go do something about it. And turns out that was right around the time that 40 Days for Life was getting started nationwide. And so we got involved. It took us relocated, but the following year we in Madison, Wisconsin, where we now live, got involved in 40 Days for Life, and the rest was history for us.
That's you said something really important. It's something that I've been talking a lot about with all the guests and individually, and that is that it's not enough to just be pro-life, but you got to get up off the couch and do something about it. And I think that especially as men, we've been conditioned in the pro-life movement. We've been conditioned by the abortion industry to sit down and shut up and stay out of it, right? And at the same time, during that same 52-year period after Roe, where we were conditioned by the abortion industry, we were overlooked by the pro-life movement because the pro-life movement was focused on moms and babies. And so So we've got one side screaming, sit down, shut up, and nobody's saying, stand up and fight. And it's not up to anybody else to say, stand up and fight, right? We're men. Like, it's up to us to not accept that we should sit down and shut up. But we did, and it was kind of like this passive acquiescence of, well, I'm pro-life. If we have a conversation about it, I'm going to have a pro-life conversation, but that's kind of the end of it. And so I like that you were triggered, to use a word that I hate, that you were triggered to get off the couch, and to go do something, but not only to go do something in your own community, but to change your life, and go do something.
Well, it's I had that trigger, and I've got a lot of respect for the good men and the good women who didn't need a trigger. It was just the right thing to do. They didn't need it to touch their lives personally. And there are a lot out there, but there are many who have a story about how they got involved for some reason. But you're right in that we can't be passive. I think if you look at scripture, of course, the priest and the Levite who encountered the robber's victim on the side of the road, they were probably, it's not like they wanted him to be beat up. They probably would have been preferred that he not be there, right? All wounded and bloodied and battered and robbed. But it was the Samaritan who did something about it. And that's where the difference comes in. Yeah.
And that's, I believe, a major characteristic of masculinity is taking action, is refusing to be passive, is seeing an injustice and saying, as a man, I have an obligation to protect, to provide, to lead, to serve. And I'm going to get up and I'm going to do something about this. And so thank you for taking that call. And how long ago was that?
That was back in 2017. I'm sorry, 2007. I just stumbled over my words there. That was 2007. So it was a while back.
So that's 18 years.
Yes. My wife at the time was 8 months pregnant with our first son, Peter, and he just graduated from high school. So I shouldn't have messed that up in that easy answer.
Wow. And how many kids do you have?
5.
5 kids. Me too. Mine.
Yeah, that's awesome.
My oldest is 10. My youngest is 5.
Okay.
And we have a 9-year-old, 2 6-year-old boys. The younger 3 are adopted. So the 2 6-year-old boys are 10 days apart.
Praise God,
twins.
that's awesome.
It is really cool. They're twins in the sense of you'll get this more than some people I talk to. Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito.
All right,
the movie Twins. I got one that's probably going to be 6'5", and I've got one that might be 5'7". If he has a growth spurt, and best friends. Very cool.
That's outstanding. Cool. So we've got the same number, but you've got a tighter spread than I do. We had our first, we thought we'd have a big old family, and then we had years of infertility and miscarriage. So we've got an 18-year-old, and then our next is 12, and then after that they go down to 5. So our youngest is 5 as well. But you've got them all crammed in there. So God bless you.
18 to 5. That's tough.
The older ones got useful, so it was not like we had 5 in a span where we're trying to do with diapers and spilled milk and stuff all the time. So
yeah, I told him my brother has 3 girls, and 2 of them are teenagers now, and we just went on vacation last week, and it was my first time to really watch 2 teenage girls love each other the way sisters do when they're teenagers. And it was very, there was a lot of energy, and a lot of, both of them are right all the time, even though neither of them agree. And so I said, man, I just realized I'm going to have 5 teenagers in the house at the exact same time. Like I'm going to have 3 boys who stink and 2 girls who fight every day. It'll be,
there will be many blessings to go along with it. Absolutely.
That's true. I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't change it.
Nobody would.
So tell us what about 40 Days for Life. Like what does 40 Days for Life do? How are you working, and what progress have you seen in the last 18 years?
Sure. So 40 Days for Life is pretty simple. It's an internationally coordinated campaign. We aim to end abortion really with 3 simple components: prayer and fasting, hopefully the bedrock foundation of all that we do as people of faith, community outreach to educate the public on the tragic reality of abortion in our midst. That's so important because you talk about 52 years and men being pushed to the sideline and support for abortion. And I'm convinced that most people who support abortion don't actually really know much about abortion. I think this would be a bigger crisis if if everybody knew about abortion and still supported it. But in many cases, I think it's not as much a moral failure as just a lack of accurate and good information. So we can do community outreach to educate people on the reality of abortion and what it does and what it doesn't do. And then the third component of these 40-day campaigns is peaceful vigil. We stand in prayer in front of abortion facilities all day, every day for 40 straight days and ask the Lord to touch hearts, change minds, save lives. So we do one in the spring and we do one in the fall, 40 days, prayer and fasting, community outreach, and peaceful vigil. And this works. This is something that's effective. I mentioned when I was an inactive pro-lifer on the couch watching football all day, I don't want to let myself off the hook, but there was a time where I think we had this idea that maybe, our contribution was voting. So we'd vote for the pro-life guy, which we should do. And what else could we do? Washington, D.C. was going to have to take care of it. Or maybe we could write a check to our local pregnancy center, which is also a good thing to do. But it's it's not like roll up your sleeves, dig in, and take the bull by the horns. And I think 40 Days for Life allows us to do that. We can go out there and ultimately, it's God who's doing the work. But just by standing there in prayer and maybe offering an alternative, we have seen more than 26,000 lives saved from abortion at that last desperate moment because somebody answered the call and went out there and prayed for an end to abortion. And we've seen workers convert. We've got 172 different abortion workers that we know have experienced conversion, left their jobs, and begun a walk with Jesus Christ. One of those is Abby Johnson, certainly the most famous of all the former abortion workers. And she started her own ministry, which has now helped hundreds of other abortion workers leave their jobs. And we've seen now really the result that's coming in, the answer to prayers that is most prevalent of late is we are seeing abortion facilities close their doors and go out of business like you would not believe. 172 different abortion facilities have closed their doors and gone out of business after one of our 40 Days for Life vigils. And that's remarkable because it's not that surprising. After Roe, you'd expect, okay, the ones in Louisiana are going to go out of business and the abortion facilities in Idaho are going to go out of business and Alabama. But we've seen abortion facilities closing their doors in the most unexpected places. I mean, Ohio enacts a referendum, a constitutional amendment protecting a right to abortion. And shortly thereafter, we see abortion facilities start closing in Ohio. Illinois says we're going to be a sanctuary state. We are going to welcome women from all the pro-life states across the Midwest to come have abortions in Illinois. And Illinois is closing. They just closed 4 different abortion facilities after 40 Days for Life campaigns. California and New York, we got the news earlier this year that the Manhattan Planned Parenthood, this is their flagship facility that was named after Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, that is going out of business. Vermont, for goodness sakes. So I'm really excited because sometimes people are like, well, it's prayer is great, but if you really want to end abortion, you got to get involved in capital and change politics, which is again a fine thing to do. But anybody can go out there and stand for 1 hour and pray and perhaps see a life saved, perhaps see a worker find salvation, perhaps see a for sale sign in front of that Planned Parenthood location.
Yeah. Have you also seen lives changed in the people who have come out there to stand on the sidewalk and pray? Because I would think that would be an incredibly powerful experience, if they are there witnessing the power of their own prayer, right?
Yes. 10 years ago, I went to the Planned Parenthood in Goshen, New York. It just closed earlier this year, actually. But I went out there to pray, and I was kind of asking them, what changes have you seen as a result of being out here? And they said, the biggest change is in us. And we've done some survey research that really backs that up. Sometimes from time to time after a 40 Days for Life vigil, we'll just send out a survey to all of our volunteers and say, just find out what went well, what didn't well. And 97% of the people who participated in the 40 Days for Life vigil said they experienced spiritual growth through their presence out there.
And so in addition, Steve, to the sidewalk and I'm going to say sidewalk counseling, but I want to ask, is it similar to sidewalk counseling? Do the people with 40 Days for Life, when they're out there, the prayer vigils, interact with the people walking into the abortion clinics?
In many cases, yes. What we tell people when they get involved in 40 Days for Life is you don't have to know anything. You don't have to talk to anybody. You don't have to speak up. All you have to do is pray for an hour. But when you go into prayer, this kind of gets back to the question you asked a moment ago. What change do you see take place in people who are participating in 40 Days for Life? Prayer is not just asking God for an end to abortion. It's listening to what he has to say too. And over again, we find people who go out there and they have no intentions in doing any sidewalk outreach, any sidewalk counseling. The Lord tugs at their heart and calls them to take a step further. I can think of a friend of mine named Dan Miller, who was invited to do 40 Days for Life. He said, no, I'd rather have all of my wisdom teeth pulled without any medication than go do 40 Days for Life. That place creeps me out. And his friend kept bugging him. And finally, Dan said, look, I'll come out one time. I will do 1 hour. I'm going to go. I'm not going to talk to any women. I'm not going to come back ever again. But if I go one time, will you leave me alone? And the buddy, Tim, he said, yes, I'll leave you alone. Dan went out there. He felt the Lord call him back. Before long, he felt the Lord call him to start speaking to these moms who are walking into the abortion facilities and sometimes the dads when he had an opportunity. Dan Miller in Milwaukee, Wisconsin has now saved, I think, more than 2,000 babies from abortion. And this is a guy who's going to go out once, never say a word to the women, but the Lord called him to do more. So we always say, I don't think it's quite a bait and switch, but we say, just come out and pray. That's all you have to do. Sometimes the Lord has more in mind.
Right. It's that trigger that we were talking about earlier, that because men need that, they need the dragon to slay, to go to John Eldridge and the princess to save. And so there's that calling inside, even if we don't know what it is that we need at this moment. Once we feel it, we know it, we recognize it, and it's exhilarating to have that battle, to fight when you see the evil that is abortion and you see the good that you can do by fighting against it. It's a fulfilling of our call to masculinity. And so that's amazing. That's a great story.
And the flip side of that, right, is that men, we don't just need the dragon, but without it, we languish. Without friction or resistance or some sort of struggle, we get really bad really quickly. I think about if my wife goes out of town to visit family for a weekend or something and I can't join her and I'm alone. I'm eating popcorn for dinner and sitting on my phone reading Twitter. It's not good. Right. We need kind of that higher calling. And I think when we lose sight of that, it gets into the point that you made at the very beginning, which is men are kind of pushed to the sideline. Well, sometimes we are pushed to the sideline. Sometimes we are more than happy to set up a hammock on the sideline and watch the world go by. And same thing when it comes to the boyfriends, the fathers of a lot of the women who are getting abortion. These women, in many cases, not all, but in many cases, they're dying for the boyfriend or the husband to say, I'm going to be there with you. We can do this. Don't go through with the abortion. And instead you get this kind of mealy mouth, well, whatever you choose, I'm going to have your back. I don't know. That's not good. We need, like you said, we need that dragon for sure.
Yeah. And that's really important what you just said. That's something that we've been talking about a lot lately because, the Vitae Foundation is currently doing a research study on men, on messaging men around abortion. But the last study they did with women, that was the basis. What you just said was, that women, and it was whether, maybe their abortion was 5 years ago, maybe it was 10 years ago, maybe it was 40 years ago. When the question of what did you want the father to say, it wasn't whatever you choose. It wasn't I'll support whatever decision you make. They wanted him to be a man. They wanted him to have an opinion. And in the absence of an opinion, when it comes to the decision to have a baby, it is a reflection of the inability to have a decision or an opinion about anything in life. And like you just said, that's like saying, hey, I can't make a decision about whether or not we should have a child. So I'm probably not going to be there to help you through this. And I'm not going to be there when the baby's born. And I'm probably not going to help you financially. And, and I don't know if, if you can't make a decision about that, if you don't have an opinion about that, then who are you? What is your identity? What is it that you can do? And so, I think it's important that we sit on that for a minute because what you just said is super important. That before we get into the books, which are called "What to Say When," which is more of a pro-life apologetics. I think that's the first conversation, right? When mom says, "Hey, I'm pregnant," and then what does dad say? Because we do know that the men who are adamant that they don't want to be, like, they're not silent, right? The men who are self-serving, I guess the way that I've said it before is no one has benefited from abortion more than weak men seeking to escape responsibility. The men who are forcing abortion, the men who are coercing abortion, the men who are pressuring and manipulating, like they're not silent. So the men who are being silent are the ones who have a different opinion, maybe want the baby, or want the baby to live, but are scared to say it. And fear is not a good quality in that circumstance.
Yeah, and I think that's why we've seen so often on the streets where, the couple goes in, they ignore the 40 Days for Life sidewalk counselors on the sidewalk, and then dad comes out to have a smoke, right? And maybe while he's smoking, he engages with the sidewalk counselors that, hey, you need to go in there and get your girlfriend out of there, save your baby, be a hero. Well, she wants the abortion. It's her body. It's her choice. I don't really have a say. And when they actually are able to persuade him to go in and talk with her, the reaction so often is relief. Oh, thank goodness. So you've got these situations where neither the boyfriend nor the girlfriend, the mother or the father, neither of them want the abortion. And they're both going through with it because they secretly think the other one does.
Right. So she's going through with it because when she asked, he said, whatever you choose to do, which is almost like saying, I don't want the baby, because if I did, I would tell you. So she believes that he doesn't want to keep the baby. So she's going through with it, which leads him to believe that she doesn't want the baby. It's really an unfortunate result of all of this pressuring by the abortion industry for men to stay out of it. Men should, like, if all the things you should stay out of, you should not stay out of protecting your own child.
Well, it's so silly too, right? Because you hear men should never, ever, anywhere, at any time, even have an opinion on abortion, much less express an opinion on abortion. Except for the all-male Supreme Court that gave us Roe v. Wade, except for abortion doctors, the majority of whom are men, except for the abortion facility owners, the majority of whom are men, except for the pro-abortion politicians, the majority of whom are men, except for the deep-pocketed donors like Warren Buffett and George Soros who are financing the abortion industry, except for the men who are volunteering for abortion, and except for the men who are paying for and pressuring and even coercing their girlfriends, their wives, and even their own daughters into having abortions. But except for all of those guys, no man gets an opinion.
Right. So, so really the only men that don't get an opinion are the men who are pro-life.
Right. And then if it's a women's issue, but the women who are pro-life, conveniently, they don't get an opinion either, right?
Right. So, yeah, that's how it goes. So the most important thing to do if a man or a woman is faced with, if a young man, I should say, is faced with an unplanned pregnancy, is to say something, to not stay silent, to not say whatever you want, which is really saying nothing. And that kind of brings us into other things to say. And you and Sean Carney with 40 Days for Life have written 2 books that I have here in front of me. What to Say When, and What to Say When Too. And these books are pro-life apologetics, walking through not only what to say when someone brings up the hard conversations, but what not to say. And I think that's a really important component. What brought you guys to write these books?
People had requested it. Are some great pro-life apologetics books out there, but a lot of the more famous ones are maybe 20, at this point, 25 years old, and didn't always reflect some of the evolution of the pro-life talk or the pro-abortion talking points. And so we set out to just kind of look at what are the crazy things the abortion industry is saying now that pro-lifers are feeling unable to respond to. And it's a funny thing because what I found, I don't think most people, you don't really need a book to tell you that killing a baby is wrong, right? But what people do need is confidence in making the argument, because it's tricky. They come at you and like, well, what about this medical situation that you've maybe never heard of? Or what about when this happens? Or what if the baby is a left-handed immigrant who's suffering from the effects of climate change? Like, and you're just like, I'm sorry, I don't even know what we're talking about anymore. And abortion supporters love to distract from the issue of what abortion is and what it does. And before you know it, you're like debating 100 other issues that don't even relate to abortion. And so we wrote really the first book to give pro-lifers confidence that you can discuss this when it comes up at, you know, the belligerent uncle at Thanksgiving dinner, or it comes up at whenever and wherever, just to be able to make the case for life and not feel like we are the side that should be on our heels. I think it's a side that says it's okay to stop a human heart from beating. They should be the ones that kind of shift uncomfortably in their seats when abortion comes up in conversation. And so we wrote this. It's very accessible, and it just gives people some talking points that they can try to commit to memory and remember that when this comes up, like, hey, we're on the side of life, and we are on the side of hope. And abortion is really rooted in despair. And we can say, look, we encounter a woman in crisis and we tell her the best we can do for her is we're going to take her money and we're going to kill her baby. I'm sorry, but that's not compassion. And that's frankly not good enough.
Right. And so I think, we were talking about this before we started recording, but I think that part of the uncomfortable feeling that comes in the pro-life person when approached with these things is that the pro-abortion arguments aren't about abortion, right? They're about like distracting. They're about deflecting. They're about choosing something to make you uncomfortable. It's about pigeonholing the pro-life person into a situation in almost like in a sense of trickery, rather than just using, rather than just talking about what abortion really is, and one of the great things about, you mentioned some other books and The Case for Life, I think is a good book. It's more like a textbook than what you guys wrote. What you guys wrote, I do believe, I agree with you, is more accessible and almost easier to follow. But one of the things that I really like that he says in there is keep bringing it back to, abortion is the intentional killing of an innocent human life. And just keep bringing it back no matter what they say, because, if they say, well, what about this? Then the question becomes, even if that's true, how does that change what I'm saying, which is that abortion is the intentional killing of an innocent human life.
And would you apply that same standard to the child after birth? And then when the answer is, well, no, of course, we're not going to kill a 7-year-old. Well, why not? And it all comes back to dehumanization. The only way you can kill an innocent human being is to dehumanize that person. And so we hear clump of cells, blob of tissue, a parasite, all of these different things. And when we can get back not just to what is abortion, but what is the fetus, that makes it very simple. If it's a human being, abortion is murder. You can't do it. If it's not, then what are pro-lifers doing? But it's actually very easy to prove that the fetus or the embryo or the zygote or whatever age or stage or phase of development you want to use, it's pretty easy to prove that it is a living human being.
Well, let's start with that one then. Like if someone were to say to you, and I think this is, I appreciate you kind of agreeing to go through some of this stuff, because I think that this is the kind of thing that that maybe someone who hasn't yet had the time or taken the time to read the books, might get excited to read the books and learn more, but also, can get that information. So if someone says, well, it's not a baby, which is a common thing, and I agree with you. Like, call it a baby, call it a fetus, call it a zygote. It doesn't matter in my definition of what we're talking about. However, what would you say to someone who says abortion can't be murder because it's not a baby?
Well, a lot of times they'll try to sort of pair that by saying it's not a life, it's a potential life. But whether they say that or not, like, a potential life has to be an actual something. So what is the fetus? Like, I think the whole debate hinges on this question. What is it? If it's not a human being, can you tell me what it is? And again, they'll kind of use fetus, and it's almost like a slur at this point. It's just a term for dehumanization, even if it is a scientific term for that phase of development. But I think we can prove quite easily that the fetus is a living human being, because all you need to do to prove that the fetus is a living human being is to prove that it's living and to prove that it's a human being. Well, is it living? Well, I don't know. Let's take a look. It's growing. Cellular division is taking place. The fetus is processing nutrition. All of these different biological life processes do not take place in non-living entities. You will never find a rock that is going to move on its own. You are not going to find a chunk of metal that is metabolizing calories. The biological life processes are there, so it's living. Okay, but is it human? I think this is also very easy to prove too, because we've established already that the fetus is alive. You don't see a living creature transform into a different species. Does not happen. Every fetus, every unborn child has a uniquely human genome comprising 23 pairs of uniquely human chromosomes bearing uniquely human DNA. And so I think it's pretty cut and dried there. Sometimes what almost makes it difficult to argue is how simple it is. People are looking for complexity, but no, I mean, the human DNA is there. It's alive. It's a human being. The only difference is, this is where another one of those great authors who've written a great pro-life book, Randy Alcorn, says there's only 4 differences between a child before birth versus after birth. Size, as any kindergartner can tell you, can tell the playground bully, go pick on someone your own size. The second one is level of development. And really, development is a continuum that continues long after birth, right? Like, teenagers' brains don't reach full maturity and development until they're in their mid-20s, long after they're actually teenagers. So birth would be somewhat of an arbitrary point to say now you're sufficiently developed, when that development continues dramatically for a long time. The third is environment. The unborn child has a very different home than you or I have. It's the womb. But again, what is so magical about the birth canal that merely by passing through it, you can turn into a living human being with full rights under the law? And then the fourth difference is degree of dependency. And frankly, Sean, I wouldn't want to live in a society that says, well, it's okay to kill this person because this person is more dependent. This person is more defenseless. This person is more vulnerable. That's the opposite of all that we hold dear as a society. We root for the underdog. We fight for the little guy. And here we have the littlest of guys. We ought to be fighting for them.
Right. And for those of you who are watching, who heard that, a really easy way to remember that is SLED. SLED would be the acronym: size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency, which kind of allows you to walk through that argument, a lot of arguments, right? Not just the it's not a baby, but it helps you to get through several arguments. For instance, as long as it's as long as it's inside of me, right? Like, it's my body, my choice. So as long as it's inside of me, I mean, that's I guess that's the whole argument. Inside of me is the environment, but that's not even what they're saying. What they're saying is, well, it's completely dependent on me, which would be the degree of dependency. So the SLED acronym is really helpful for people who are engaging in these conversations. And I appreciate you walking through what that stood for.
Well, it can get really absurd really quickly, because as you mentioned, I think those last two, environment, the womb, or degree of dependency, all of those sort of play into the my body, my choice, or bodily autonomy sort of arguments. And perhaps we have bodily autonomy, but to whatever extent we have bodily autonomy, it does not extend to a right to harm another's bodily autonomy, to infringe upon another's bodily autonomy, even if that other is a child in the womb. There's that kind of, I think it's a libertarian saying, but I think it applies here, that my right to swing my fist ends where your nose begins. There's a totally different body there. As we established when we discussed that the fetus is a living human being, we can look at all these slogans, get your rosaries off my ovaries, no uterus, no opinion. It's not a woman's ovaries or her uterus that are being aborted. We've got our own slogans too. Abortion stops a beating heart, and the heart that stops beating is not the mother's heart. The arms and the legs that are torn apart and dismembered during an abortion, not the mother's arms and legs. So sure, bodily autonomy, my body, my choice, but does not extend to the right to do violence to another.
That's right. And then, on the other side of that, they will use the most violent situations as an attempt to kind of sway the argument. And what's really interesting is, and I'm going to bring up probably one of the most difficult things, which is I would say that when the pro-choice side says, do you want to force a 13-year-old rape victim to have a baby? It's less than 1% of abortions, but probably 75 to 80% of pro-choice argument, right? Is the 13-year-old rape victim, which is a horrible situation, and I've gotten to the point, honestly, where I've just immediately asked the person, hey, if I concede on rape, will you concede on every other abortion? And when they say no, then I just tell them, stop exploiting rape victims. Like, you are exploiting people at their most vulnerable who you don't care about, because if you did, then that would be your basis. But it's not. Like, you're using these people. You're using people who have been through this incredible trauma in order to make an argument that you can't support without them. And it's not only disingenuous, like, it's really offensive to use people who have experienced horrible things in an effort to prop up an argument that you don't even believe in. But you've got a great section on this type of conversation in your book, and it not only gets into what to say, but I think really importantly, it gets into what not to say. And so if you don't mind, I'd like you to kind of touch on that one.
Sure. You mentioned the fact that we're talking like 1% of all abortions are in the wake of rape. I think the number is probably less than that, where I've actually seen data. We're talking a fraction of a percent. But this is a case where we have to be very careful, because if we say, well, rape only accounts for 1% of all abortions, it sort of suggests maybe that we're dismissing those women who have been through that very real trauma. And I don't want to do that. I know that's not what you're doing here. It is true that it's outrageous to exploit rape victims to justify 1 million abortions a year. I mean, frankly, if there's nothing wrong with abortion, why do we have to bring rape into it? Just get the abortion. Who cares what the reason is if there's nothing wrong with it? You don't need to justify it by going to the margins. But for the women who have suffered it, we want to be careful not to make it sound like, oh, well, it's just those women. And it's sort of, when we say it's only 1%, it can sort of suggest that there would be cases in which we would accept violence against unborn children. But frankly, I know you agree and I agree, and I think most pro-lifers agree that even if abortion only took place after rape, we would still want to fight for those babies and defend them. And so what we do think is helpful to say is to acknowledge right off the bat, when rape comes up in the context of abortion, that there are 3 people in the conversation. And the first is the rapist. And we need to acknowledge right off the bat that he's a criminal, that he belongs in prison, lock him up, and throw away the key for all I care. He's a criminal, he belongs in prison. And we have to say this right off the bat, because when rape comes up, oftentimes abortion supporters are using it as another one of those distractions. They recognize that abortion is an act of violence, and they are eager to distract from that reality by bringing up another act of violence, in this case, rape. And so we need to not allow them to sort of pin as the pro-lifers, we're the compassionate side of the debate. We're trying to offer this rape victim a choice. The pro-lifers, they want to deny choice. They side with the rapist. It's disingenuous. They say it all the time, but it's disingenuous. There's no pro-lifer I've ever met, or I would be willing to bet that you've ever met, who has ever been in favor of rape. There's no abortion supporters who are in favor of rape, except for the actual rapists themselves who love abortion. But all of that said, we need to acknowledge, I think, right off the bat that this is an act of violence and there's no place for it, and the perpetrator belongs behind bars. The second person involved is the victim, and she is a victim. She didn't ask for this. She doesn't want this. She didn't deserve this. What she does deserve is care. Physical care, health care, emotional care, mental health care, spiritual care. And selling her an abortion does none of those things. Selling her abortion just adds one act of violence on top of another. And that's why the women that we've spoken with who have had abortions after suffering the trauma of rape have told us that all the abortion did was add an anniversary to their calendar. And first time I heard that, I did not know what it meant. And what it meant is that I don't want to speak for all women, all rape victims, but from the ones that we've spoken with, they have told us that women who've suffered rape, they all remember the anniversary of their abortion, of their rape. And every time that part of the year comes around, they sort of relive that experience, are re-traumatized by it. And if they then had an abortion in response, now they've got a second anniversary where they are reliving the trauma of both the rape and the abortion all over again. And so they've told us that it was not a helpful thing to them. It only harmed them. So the first two people involved in this conversation are the rapist and the victim. The third person involved in this conversation is the person that so much of our society would prefer to pretend doesn't exist, and that's the baby. And look, this is America. We don't punish children for the sins of their father, for the crimes of their father. If anything, again, we root for the underdog. We want to give them a fighting chance. I don't think we do anything to empower women by pitting them against their own children. We had a conversation with a woman who I know whose name is Rowan, and she was out jogging and she was attacked and raped and she conceived, and her doctors told her she needed to get an abortion. She was a brilliant student with a promising future. She was throwing it all away unless she got this abortion. And she knew that the promise of abortion was an empty promise, so she chose life. She said, I've talked to women who've had abortions. They're still dealing with the fallout 20 or 30 years later. I don't want to just have a race to see how many traumas I can rack up in my life. So the doctor said she's throwing away her future, her career, her education, but she chooses life. She graduates first in her college class with highest honors, and she walks across the stage to receive her diploma with her baby on her hip. She is in medical school on pace to be a doctor. So I love to tell stories like that when rape comes up in these abortion conversations.
Yeah. So what do we say?
I think we tell these stories of these women like Rowan, or, in a lot of cases, another story I found very powerful. This gets to the incest side of rape and incest, right? I think we tell these stories. I have a friend named Christy, and Christy's story is really a tragic one. Christy's biological father is also her biological grandfather. This is a sick man. He abused his own daughter for many years, resulting in the conception of Christy and of 5 siblings. Of those siblings, Christy was the only survivor. One of the siblings was miscarried due to the severity of the physical abuse, and the other 4 were aborted. Why? Because abortion destroys the evidence of a sexual assault. This abortion, you said abortion is like the bad man's best friend. This is like exhibit A, in my opinion. This sick man used abortion to destroy the evidence of his abuse of his own daughter. And in doing so, it allowed him to continue abusing his own daughter for more than 20 years. And so I think the people who are like, hey, well, what about the cases of rape? What about the cases of incest? You hear a story like Christie's, that rape was actually something that facilitated and perpetuated the abuse. It suddenly doesn't look so compassionate anymore.
Yeah. And that's a horrible and incredibly disturbing story. But I think that it is more widespread than that, and there's been undercover videos where this has been exposed, where people are posing as traffickers of underage girls, and the abortion clinic workers are trying to help them get through the process, and I don't think I need to do anything else to demonize the abortion clinics, but the reality is that traffickers, pimps, and other people who are abusing women or minors are using abortion, like you said, as a tool, and I feel like there should be way more of an outcry about that from the pro-choice side, because it's no longer choice in these situations, right? It's they're taking forcing someone to have an abortion is not giving them a choice, but they never talk about that, and it's really kind of crazy. And I don't know if it's because they want to, they need it to be one of those stories that doesn't exist in order for them to be able to believe their own narrative. That they need Rowan's story not to exist. That they need the other young lady who you talked about with the 5 siblings. They need their stories to not exist. My friend Stephen Holland, who was conceived in rape. They need him to not exist. And I've met several people through this work who were conceived in rape, who were raped and chose life. People who are abortion survivors, right? They need them to not exist. They need people like me who lost a child to abortion, and it destroyed my life for years. Like that can't be real. And in fact, that's what happened. They live action did an interview and posted some clips of it, and the comments were of me telling my story were things that never happened for $500. Like men never, this never happens. And it's not just when I tell my story; it's anytime a man shares a story. They need these stories not to exist, because if they exist, then it topples the entire argument, because it's no longer just about women's choice.
Abortion is such a traumatic thing too, that you've got to do something with the pain, right? And in a lot of cases, what you do is you redirect it toward the people who are against abortion. And that's why people, it's not too bad, but you're out there praying in front of an abortion facility and you get like the middle fingers with the crazy eyes where they're just trying to stare through you. They want us to be the bad guys, because if we are mean, if we're denying them choice, if we're looking to control women's bodies, that kind of sets us up as the foil, and it justifies. See, I'm right to work at Planned Parenthood. I was right to get an abortion. Look at how mean these people are. If they sort of acknowledge the love or the stories of triumph, the facade crumbles away. We've got a woman named Paula who works at the abortion facility in Memphis, Tennessee. And she was raped and she conceived and she decided to choose life. And she was run out of pro-life circles for that. I mean, I thought this was about choice. Isn't her choice valid? No, there people who were her friends suddenly started making Mother's Day contributions in her honor to Planned Parenthood, and she got run out of her friend group, all these sorts of things. It's a very vicious thing. And that's why I think coming at it with love is so important. When we stand out there on the sidewalk and somebody is screaming at us and we don't take the bait and yell back, then they have to say, oh gosh, these people are not as bad as I was told they were.
Yeah. And, and on that same note, how about, pro-life people only care about the baby until it's born? That's something we hear all the time.
Yeah, it's almost a point that I think is almost not worth acknowledging. Like, we kind of sometimes will respond to it with sarcasm. Be like, you're right. Once the kids are born, forget about them. Get rid of them. Losers. Don't want them. And then, like, how do the abortion supporters respond to that? It's just demonstrating the absurdity of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I get, and I mean, not everybody can do this. And I don't believe that, that if you're pro-life, you have to adopt children. I just happen to have adopted children, but on many of my posts, and I repost this every time it happens because it just makes me happy. I get comments that say, if you're pro-life, why don't you adopt kids? And so I respond, with the reality of my family. And then they just go away. Like, that's it.
Because it's never enough, right? Like, we had a one of my colleagues is named Sue Thayer. She worked for Planned Parenthood for close to 20 years. She had a beautiful conversion testimony. After another 10 or so years, she came and worked with 40 Days for Life. She tragically passed away from cancer very quickly a few years ago. But Sue would be out there doing the 40 Days for Life vigils, and people, how many foster children have you taken in? The answer to that question, I can't remember, but it was many dozens. She brought in many dozens of foster children, adopted a number of them permanently. And it's just as you said, if you're like, hey, if we conceded all of the babies conceived in rape, would you be pro-life for all the rest? Same thing here. There's no magic number of adoptions or foster children that you can care for. There was suddenly there, okay, I see the light now.
Right. So other than the ones that we've already touched on, what do you think are the hardest arguments to have, or dialogues to have, I should say? And they are arguments, but I think that it's really important. I think it's really important, and I'd like you to kind of touch on this, that as pro-life people, when we engage in these conversations, that we not get sucked into the vitriol, like you mentioned a minute ago. When it comes from the other side, there's that brokenness that leads to anger, that kind of forcefully comes out in their conversation, and that's another emotional tactic. But it's important that as pro-life people, when you stand in truth and you stand in the light and you stand, with God behind you, you don't have to allow that to really get to you and re-engage that same way. So there was a really long way to say what I was saying, but in these dialogues, so I'm going to change it from argument to dialogue. Sorry to walk you through my entire thought process out loud on the microphone. But when we engage in these dialogues, what do you think are the hardest that we haven't already talked about?
That we haven't already talked about, I would say, well, what about life of the mother? Women will die if abortion isn't allowed. And it usually comes into one or both of the following situations. One, a woman has a life-threatening health condition, and unless she has an abortion, she's going to die. Or two, women are going to get abortions anyway. And if it's not legal, it won't be safe. If it's not safe, they're going to die of these back alley, self-induced, botched coat hanger abortions. So women will die. I mean, we heard this all the time after Roe v. Wade was overturned. And I think we can go through each of those two categories. The first one is what about the women who have the life-threatening health condition and they need abortion, otherwise they're going to die? And we can say very honestly that there is no such scenario in which that is the case. You can find thousands of doctors all around the world who will testify that you never need an abortion to save a woman's life. I point to two of them in particular. One of them is Dr. Tony Levatino. He's a former abortionist. He killed tens of thousands of babies in his career, and he justified many of them by saying they were necessary to save the life of the mother. After he converted and became a Christian, he said, you know how many of those abortions I actually had to do? 0. The other doctor I point to is Dr. Alan Guttmacher, who is known as the father of Planned Parenthood. And way back in the 60s, he acknowledged that there's never a scenario in which you need an abortion to save a woman's life. I'd like to ask, if that was true in the 60s, how much more true is it today after 60 plus years of advancements in medical science and technology? So I think we can kind of throw that out. I always like to ask, what are these scenarios? What is the health condition in which a woman needs an abortion to save her life? And how would the abortion save her life? And what would the cause of death have been if she died? And nobody can give an answer. Back prior to November's election, I had a politician canvasser come to my door with the same thing. You need to vote for my candidate because all of the women are dying since Roe v. Wade was overturned. I said, can you name one? Well, there's lots of them. What was the cause of death? Well, there's lots of those too. I said, can you, I don't need the whole list. Just tell me one and how abortion would have saved her life. And the guy said, my mom's a nurse. Do you think you know more than she does? That's the best they have. And these are hard sometimes because they'll come at you with
I'm going to call my mom.
Yeah. Phone a friend. they'll come at you with some health condition that you may or may not have ever heard of. They'll be like, well, she's going to die if she doesn't have an abortion. And that's tough, right? Like we hear, what about ectopic pregnancy? Look, that's like treatment for an ectopic pregnancy is not the same thing as abortion. Like suffice it to say, if you treat the diseased portion of the fallopian tube to save a mother's life, it's possible the baby doesn't survive that. But that's not the same as abortion because it doesn't directly target the unborn child and it doesn't intentionally target the unborn child. It's just a side effect of the medical treatment that is being provided. Maybe a mother she's got uterine cancer and she needs, radiation treatment. Like Planned Parenthood will sell you a lot of different types of abortions, a D&E, a D&C, the abortion pill. You get manual aspiration abortions. You can get all sorts of different abortions. They don't have a radiation abortion. And for that matter, if a woman needs radiation treatment or chemotherapy, that's not the same thing as abortion. But if you give her an abortion, does that mean the cancer goes away? No, it doesn't. So I think this is a tricky one. I think it can sort of suffice it to say for pro-lifers, there's never a scenario in which abortion is necessary to save a woman's life. But it's tricky because they may come at you with some health condition you've never heard of. And riddle me this, Batman. What about this? Tough.
Well, I think, Steve, that this has been incredibly helpful. I think that this is a lot of information. I do want to be respectful of your time. I want to make sure that we tell everybody that doesn't already know this, that 40 Days for Life is a nonprofit. And as we are all in the nonprofit world, it's really important that anyone that hears this and appreciates what you guys are doing knows how they can help and how they can donate. So can you tell us where they can find you, where they can support you, and anything else that you can tell us about how people can get involved with 40 Days for Life?
That's very kind of you. I appreciate that. 40daysforlife.com. It's a great place to get involved in the vigil and sign up to participate and pray. I think that's, we're grateful for any donations, which can be made at 40daysforlife.com/donate. But the most important thing is time. Come out and pray. Join us. Our next vigil is September 24th through November 2nd. We're still putting new cities on the map for that vigil, but find the one closest to you, or maybe take a leap of faith and lead a 40 Days for Life vigil where you live. 40daysforlife.com. You can find out all the information. Drop us an email, steve@40daysforlife.com. And the other thing I'd encourage anyone to do, if you don't mind me making a plug for the books, is get these books, What to Say When, What to Say When To. We've got some other great books. You can get them at 40daysforlifegear.com or on Amazon.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you said that because I do think that's important. And as I showed earlier, I do have these two books sitting on my desk right now, and they've been very helpful to me. I know we've already said this too, but a lot of times when you get into the pro-life books, they can be almost like a textbook. There's just so much information, going back so far and so much detail that it really is helpful with the books that you and Sean wrote. What to Say When and What to Say When To, that they are written from an easier to digest standpoint than some of the other books. So, I've obviously not read every pro-life book, but
and there's so many great ones. But great, I appreciate that. There's so many good ones. I don't want to disparage any of them, but one of the things I learned early on is that the abortion side will sort of say, "Well, you're anti-science." And that's not true. We can come at this argument with all sorts of data and facts and figures and studies. The abortion industry never does that. The abortion industry comes out and be like, here's Cheryl in Texas, and because she couldn't have an abortion, all these terrible things happened. And so I think it shows the power of storytelling. Jesus told stories, and we can tell stories, but ours are true. We've got data to back them up. If you really want to get into all of the facts and figures, the books are heavily footnoted, so you can prove that this is like real stuff we're talking about, not merely anecdotes. But stories are easy to share in the context of conversation because you don't need to remember any numbers, and they grip the heart. So that's what we try to do in these books.
And I think number 2 came out this year, right? So these are or did
just about just shy of a year ago.
Last year. Okay.
Yeah.
So these are up to date. And you did say something right before we started talking about the books that I want to ask you about. So for instance, where I am, I'm in Lake Charles, Louisiana. There are no abortion clinics. How do people in places where there are no abortion clinics get involved with 40 Days for Life?
Well, in some of these locations, they'll still do 40 days for life vigils. I think we had one in Lake Charles where they just said, look, we don't have abortion here, but we know that women may be tempted to leave our state and go have an abortion somewhere else. So we're just going to find the town square or the busy intersection, and we're going to stand vigil as it is. But other ways to get involved, you can find them all at 40daysforlife.com. You can get educated with our podcast. We've got a free quarterly magazine, 40daysforlife.com/magazine, which has all sorts of information on getting involved. And I think one of the reasons why we've gone heavily on these books is because you never know when abortion is going to come up in conversation. President Reagan famously said, all meaningful change in America begins at the dinner table. And when you read these books, you read our magazine, you listen to shows like yours or podcasts like ours, you are just sort of equipped to have that conversation and change those hearts and change those minds. You know, there's some really interesting research out there where the abortion industry will say, gosh, you know, we've just had Planned Parenthood defunded. A majority of Americans opposes defunding Planned Parenthood. But you know what? A majority of Americans doesn't even know that Planned Parenthood does abortions. They did 400,000 last year. Americans don't know it. So when we educate ourselves and equip ourselves, we can have the conversations. And you never know when that's going to save. You know, abortion comes up at the water cooler at work. You don't know when you're going to maybe indirectly save your colleague's baby from abortion because you were equipped to have a conversation. You don't know when your niece is at Thanksgiving dinner, and because you made a short but informed case for life that maybe gives her the strength that she needs not to have an abortion. We really are, I think, as we see states like Louisiana and so many others protect unborn life, we need to keep it that way, and B, continue to change those hearts and minds so that we don't find a state like Louisiana as the scenario where the demon is swept away and comes back with 7 of its friends, leaving the latter state worse than the original state.
Amen. And you said something else real quick that I want to touch on, which is, you said, your niece, and that reminded me of something that happened last week on vacation. My 16-year-old niece, she said, Uncle Sean, I really don't like the people who comment on your TikToks, but that opened up a conversation, right? Number one, she's paying attention, which is good that she's paying attention. And then it allowed me to get into the conversation about, that it doesn't bother me, because, it's really easy to say whatever you want to say behind a keyboard. Right. And as we've already expressed, like, a lot of the anger comes from brokenness, and while I disagree with the anger, and while I disagree with the position, I can have empathy for the brokenness. And so with that empathy comes, an understanding that I don't have to take this too seriously, because if we were having a serious conversation, irrational and objective conversation, it probably wouldn't be going this way. But to just let her know that, that what's important about that is that in the face of opposition, that you stand in truth, that we don't back down because of hatred and vitriol and anger and an emotional argument, but that we stand in truth, knowing that we are on the right side of this. And so like you said, you never know when these conversations can take place, and that was it. That was the end of the conversation, right? We didn't get into abortion. We didn't get into any of the details of my work. It was just like, that was it. But it's really important, and these conversations can take place, and people are watching, that your teenage niece is watching, your kids are watching, even if they don't fully understand everything, they're paying attention to you and how you respond and the words that you say and the actions you take. So anyway, you made me think about that, and I just wanted to kind of point that out. Yeah. I appreciate that. All right, great. Steve. Well, I think we're right out of time. I appreciate you so much again. And man, I look forward to having another conversation with you soon.
Oh, I hope so too. Thank you so much.
Thank you.